We spent a lot of the week trying to figure out, is the Fed ahead, are they behind, where are the markets in relationship? Where is the Fed compared to where it thought it was going to be, what its plan is?
The Fed is behind the curve. There have been 6 jolts to the Fed in the last 6 weeks. The seasonal adjustments of the CPI took the trend downwards in inflation during 2022 out of the data. The inflation figures for the last several months of 2022 were revised upwards, further taking any sign of declining inflation out. We got a CPI number that was very disappointing in terms of how high the level and the core was, and that was reinforced by the PCE information when it came in. All the indicators for January read strong, suggesting that monetary policy has not yet gotten substantial traction in slowing the fullness of the aggregate economy down. The wage inflation numbers, as they have been revised, no longer show the kind of reductions that we had been expecting, or many had been expecting to see. And you've seen interest rates move to ratchet upwards, with the 10-year crossing 4 and the 2-year reaching record levels. Put all that together, and I think a reasonable assessment of where the Fed is would say that they have not been this far behind the curve for a year or so. Once again, the forces, the arguments made by Team Transitory have unfortunately looked more like wishful thinking, and you can see that in the evolution of rhetoric from "we will have a soft landing" towards "it's possible that we will have a soft landing." Of course, it is possible that we will have a soft landing, but maximizing that limited prospect depends upon realistically assessing the situation.
Okay, once they've assessed the situation realistically, if they're behind the curve, how do they catch up? What do they do going forward? What is the policy?
Look, they're not in the right place right now with respect to March. I saw an estimate suggesting that markets right now are assigning a 22% probability to a 50 basis point move in March. The Fed right now should have the door wide open to a 50 basis point move in March. No need to be committed to that till we see the next employment figures, till one sees what happens in markets. But if markets are now saying 22%, that means the door isn't open to that possibility. And there's a very significant chance that that's going to be the right thing to do. The main reason to move slowly in monetary policy is because you want to preserve the option of moving less far. It's looking less and less likely that the right thing to do is to not raise rates by at least another 50 basis points. And if that is the right thing to do, it's best for credibility and it's best for ultimate stability to make that move more quickly. So I've been very disappointed to see some of the speeches coming out of the Fed that have seemed to leave March off the table as a possible place for 50. And I hope the senior leadership of the Fed will guide to agnosticism on the possibility of a 50 basis point move in March, and we'll do that sometime very soon.
Larry, we all cling to the notion that our central bank is independent from the political process in this country. At the same time, we're going to have Jay Powell up for testimony for 2 days before Congress next week. We also have a nomination to come of a new vice chair. Does politics necessarily get injected? Already people are talking about possible candidates for the vice chair position, whether they're a hawk or a dove, with some of the more progressives in Congress saying, let's get a dove in there.
I guess I'd say this. I'd say that the chairman has an important opportunity when he testifies to reset expectations and to address the growing credibility problems that the Fed has. I think progressives are making a serious mistake even by their own lights. If there's a sense that progressive political conviction is guiding the next nomination, and even more if that's successful in getting a person confirmed, I think there'll be very little impact on the next 2 or 3 appointments, the next 2 or 3 decisions, because the Fed's going to want to show its independence. The incumbents are going to want to look like they have not been pushed around. A new person's not going to have immediate impact. So you won't affect rates in the short run, but that sign of politicization will cause issues of medium-term expectation, and that will cause the back end of the curve to rise. So ironically, that kind of political pressure is likely to put more inflation premium into interest rates and likely to lead to higher long rates, which means higher mortgage rates for the very people progressives are trying to help. This is really a very misguided and problematic strategy for progressives, even if one had their judgment that what's most important is lower rates and to stimulate the economy. So I hope they'll back off this kind of public campaign.
Larry, on Sunday begins the meetings of the National People's Congress over in China. Everybody's anticipating new projections for growth as well as a new economic team for President Xi. What are you looking for?
You know, I think there are 2 things that people should keep in mind as they're thinking about China. One is the importance of predictability and stability. I think that the Chinese underestimate the extent to which previously respected members of the financial community can disappear without that having collateral impacts on confidence and on the flow of capital. And if there's a sense of the politicization of things financial to a growing degree, I think that's something they've got to be very careful of. There's a backdrop that's maybe an undertold story, which is that which is what's happening demographically. Nick Eberstadt, who is the leading watcher of all things demographic, tells us in the Washington Post that China has half as many births last year as it did in 2016. That is a sea change with extraordinary speed. The downwards trend had heavily started before COVID. And in addition to what that means for the labor force, the age structure of the population down the road, when a population's deciding to have half as many children and have that revolution in 6 years, it says there's some very fundamental concerns about the future in that society.